Now, there is one heck of a game that is starting to be played in and around Canberra. It is the expectations game about the federal budget. Now, the government, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer deliberately trying to say, nothing to fear here, it will be nowhere near the 2014 budget. And understandably, that's the case. We all know why. It's not because they don't want to reform. It's not because they don't have ideas. It's because the Senate will vote down every one of them, no matter how sensible. In fact, $30 billion worth of ideas have been knocked back by the Senate, with Labor even voting against their own ideas to save money, and they are constantly rewarded in the polls. Now, there's nothing new in all of this, but here is the game that's being played in Canberra. You may have noticed there's an awful lot of people in the press gallery now starting to talk about the idea, almost mournfully, that this government will give up on big ideas. And if it gives up on big ideas, then how will we save our country from the budget emergency? Now, I'm sorry, I don't care what anyone else says. If we have a country that spends $40 billion more than it makes, that's an emergency, because it's something that will be harder for our kids to pay off, and it'll be harder for all of us to make the most out of our government. It means they have to keep inefficient taxes in place because they have to hold on to every damn dollar they can get. But the game being played in Canberra is the media will now start to coalesce around the idea that there is a budget problem, even though they have run every single story for the past year of every victim of a government's decision. No one who's in advocacy of these decisions, just all the people that are on the wrong side of them. And the result? The government has copped it and copped it for months. But the other game is the game being played by those who want to get rid of Tony Abbott. And their whole plan is to get rid of him after the next budget. You see, their assumption, their hope, is that this year's budget will be exactly the same as last year's budget. And if so, the Senate, which will vote everything down, and the endless, almost year-long negotiations only to lose in the end, will mean that the Prime Minister yet again will be wounded, yet again will be hurt. Andrew Laming will start leaking to reporters like a sieve. All those backbench bedwetters who were willing to vote against the Prime Minister, they get up and going again, and then it's all on again for Malcolm. Now, we know that Arthur Sinodinos is a man who, at one point, when asked if Tony Abbott would be the Prime Minister, said to David Spears on this very station, "Check back with me next week, comrade." But it was interesting to see that he was starting to run the narrative that, dear God, may this government not give up on reform. He said it again to David this afternoon. Have a look.
We can't take our foot off the pedal on this. I can't give you the scale of savings compared to last year, but over time we do have to have important, big reforms that give us the savings that mean that we have, as a small open economy, the sort of budget that is a cushion for the inevitable economic shocks.
Okay, so don't give up on reform, because if we give up on reform, then the budget emergency will hit us and we'll all be in trouble. The only problem is that Mr Sinodinos, a former Assistant Treasurer who has now got it in for Tony Abbott and his team after being dumped from that team, and apparently was quite offended at the way he was dumped, well, he has been one of the not-so-subtle advocates for a change in leadership, and most likely one to Malcolm Turnbull. So that's the game. The press will now start talking about the need for reform. The politicians who will say it very loudly about the need for reform will also be the ones who will run in exactly the opposite direction if they need to actually fight for any of those reforms. And as for the bloke who has been rewarded by the opinion polls for saying no, 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 even to the stuff he took to the last election, well, this interview is a couple of days old, but behold, the alternative, the preferred Prime Minister of Australia. You've got a current Prime Minister who does have ideas, and you've got this idiot who is just trying to sail in through the back door. Have a listen to him on 3LO.
Want to put taxes up?
No, well, John, the discussion we're going to have is a bit longer than one-liners. One is we must invest in science and innovation. Two, we must make sure that we've got an education system which is providing lifelong learning, from childcare through to schools, through to higher ed and TAFE.
You're at risk of repeating yourself. I'm asking you to explain how you pay for all of these things and the infrastructure that the increasingly growing fast cities desperately need.
Well, you go to the next lever. If education's one lever that the national government can help pull to make this country grow, because I believe that if you invest in people's minds and let people fulfil their own potential, then they will find those economic opportunities that's so necessary to growth.
Gibber, gibber, gibber. Seriously, this is extraordinary. that we live in this scenario now where the Senate will vote every good and serious idea down, yet the press gallery, who will conveniently engage whether we do or don't have a budget problem, gets to play games that essentially are about trying to goad the government into reforms in order for them to be beaten by the Senate, in order to eventually get their ultimate wish, which is a change in leader. Now, I want a government, yes, that keeps going for those reforms, but I also want one that is smart enough to work out the death by 1,000 cuts of the past 12 months led to the bedwetting spill that never was, led to the instability, led to the very problems that meant Bill Shorten, the bloke who has no ideas, and this is the year of ideas. We're almost a quarter of the way through that year. No ideas. The best he can serve up is to go after Google for extra billions. The problem is a $40 billion problem. The answer is not that bloke or the bedwetters. The answer is tough medicine, and tough medicine means there will be some victims. I appeal to politicians and media alike not to blow it out of proportion. Sometimes the greater good is worth the short-term pain. But then again, it's probably not as much fun on clickbait on the internet. Can you know what you think? Hashtag PM Live, email pmlive@skynews.com.au. All right, this and so much more tonight. Vanessa Grimm, lovely to see you. What do we need to know?
Good to see you, Paul Murray. Congratulations on your Astra Awards.
Thank you very much. You can have one.
I'm not worthy. Let's take a look at the top stories this evening. And the Prime Minister has suggested his government's second budget will be nearly the polar opposite of the first, calling it almost dull. Tony Abbott says he still wants to tackle debt further, but it appears it's a long-term goal, with the next budget to be friendlier for families. Labor says the government is sending out mixed messages.
Budget 2015 will be handed down in just 8 weeks, and Tony Abbott hopes it will be a typical sequel.
It will be a much less exhilarating budget.
The PM is aiming for almost boring compared to the 2014 budget, which excited voters for all the wrong reasons. This budget will have plenty of sugar.
But there'll be something in it for families, a better childcare deal in particular.
The PM, elected on a mantra of tackling debt and deficit, now more comfortable with increasing the nation's debt over the next 4 decades.
A ratio of debt to GDP at about 50 or 60% is a pretty good result looking around the world.
That's about 5 times the country's debt level when Tony Abbott came to power, and assumes the government walks away from $30 billion in savings blocked in the last budget.
Will the Prime Minister confirm that the same cuts and chaos of the last budget will be front and centre in the next budget?
What would you do? What would you do?
Tony Abbott is using the intergenerational report to say he has already improved the budget. The line in red projects a do-nothing approach. The line in blue includes budget 2014, with the budget getting near surplus in 5 years' time. But after 5 years, it's a steady decline to a 6% annual deficit by 2055.
We can't take our foot off the pedal on this. I can't give you the scale of savings compared to last year, but over time we do have to have important big reforms.
The Prime Minister's appetite for tackling debt appears to have waned, chastened by a public backlash and slipping party room support that resulted in that near-death experience. It's a debt warning with the edges taken off. The intergenerational report front and centre. Tom Connell, Sky News, Canberra.
Still on politics, and Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce has joined the Prime Minister in playing down reports that the government could be headed to an early election. It's understood the prospect of a double dissolution was raised at a cabinet dinner on Monday. But Mr Joyce has told Sky News he doesn't like the possibility of increasing the number of independent senators in Parliament.
Let's dispense with that one. I'll tell you why. I'll be completely pragmatic. If we find it difficult dealing with 8 senators, how do you reckon you're going to deal with 16 independent senators? I mean, you know, we'll have someone from the bully bushwhacker party and they'll end up having 3 seats. I mean, we will go mad. Or, you know, if you're on the journey to madness, a double dissolution and a whole range of new independent senators from a whole crazy diaspora will send you completely around the twist.
The stabbing murder of a Melbourne